The restraining order says my best friend can't come near me, but she's pregnant with my husband's baby, and I helped them do it. My name is Rachel. I'm 32 years old, and I'm sitting in my lawyer's office trying to figure out how my entire life imploded in the space of 6 months. My hands won't stop shaking. The restraining order is sitting on the desk between us, and I keep staring at it like it's written in a foreign language. But let me back up. Let me tell you how we got here. 3 days after I found out about the pregnancy, I drove to Jessica's apartment. Not my apartment anymore, hers. The one I helped her move into last year when she was crying about needing a fresh start after her divorce. I used my key. Yeah, I still had a key. I walked right in at 6 in the morning, and I just stood there in her bedroom doorway watching her sleep. I didn't say anything. I just watched her for maybe 5 minutes. Her hand was resting on her stomach. She wasn't showing yet, but she was doing that thing pregnant women do, that protective gesture, and something inside me just snapped. I walked over to her bed and I said, "Wake up, Jess." She screamed. Actually screamed. Then she saw it was me, and her face went through about 15 different emotions in 3 seconds. Fear, guilt, defiance, more fear. "Rachel, what are you? How did you?" "I still have my key," I said. My voice sounded weird, flat. "Remember? You gave it to me for emergencies. You need to leave." She was sitting up now, pulling her blanket up to her chin like it could protect her. "Rachel, please. You're scaring me." "I'm scaring you?" I laughed. It didn't sound like my laugh. "That's interesting, Jess. That's really interesting. I'm calling the police." "Go ahead," I said. "Call them. Tell them how you've been sleeping with my husband for 8 months. Tell them how you're pregnant. Tell them how I was so stupid, so monumentally idiotic, that I actually encouraged the whole thing." Her face went pale. "You need therapy, Rachel. This isn't healthy." That's when I lost it. I grabbed her phone off the nightstand and threw it across the room. It hit the wall and shattered. Jessica screamed again, and that's when her neighbor must have called the police because suddenly there were sirens and pounding on the door. The cops took me away. Jessica was crying, telling them I'd broken in, that she was afraid for her safety and the safety of her unborn child. She played it perfectly, the victim card. And maybe she was the victim in that moment. I don't know anymore. But here's the thing nobody understands. Here's the part that makes me want to crawl out of my own skin. I really did help them do it. Let me go back further. Let me tell you about the Rachel from a year ago, because that woman feels like a stranger to me now. A year ago, my husband Michael and I had been trying to get pregnant for 3 years. 3 years of negative tests, 3 years of fertility treatments, 3 years of watching my body fail at the one thing I wanted most in the world. The doctors couldn't find anything wrong with either of us. Unexplained infertility, they called it. Like giving it a medical name made it hurt less. Michael said he was fine with not having kids. He said I was enough, but I could see it in his eyes every time we went to a family gathering and his brother's kids would run up to him. I could hear it in his voice when he'd casually mention that his coworker just announced their second pregnancy. I was drowning in my own failure, and I was pulling him down with me. Jessica had been my best friend since college. 14 years. She was the maid of honor at my wedding. She was the one who held me while I cried after every negative test. She was the one who drove me to fertility appointments when Michael had to work. She knew everything about me. Everything. And she'd been divorced for 2 years at this point. Her ex-husband Marcus had cheated on her with his secretary. Cliché, I know, and it had destroyed her. She'd spent months on my couch, crying, planning revenge that never materialized, eating ice cream at 2 in the morning. I'd been there through all of it. So when Jessica told me she was thinking about getting a sperm donor, I thought it was a great idea. "You'd be an amazing mom," I told her. We were having wine at my place. Michael was out of town for work. "You don't need a man to have a baby. The thing is," she said, swirling her wine, "I don't want to use an anonymous donor. I want to know who the father is. I want my kid to have that option, you know? To know where they came from?" "That makes sense," I said. "So I've been thinking about asking someone I know." She looked at me, really looked at me. Someone who would be an amazing father. Someone kind and smart and successful. I should have known. I should have felt it in that moment. But I was so wrapped up in my own pain that I missed it completely. "Do you have someone in mind?" I asked. "I've been thinking about Michael." I laughed. I actually laughed. "Michael? My Michael?" "Hear me out," she said quickly. "I know it sounds crazy, but think about it, Rachel. He's perfect. He's everything I'd want in a biological father for my child. And you guys are done trying, right? You said you were done." "We haven't decided that yet," I said. But even as I said it, I knew it was a lie. We were done. The fertility treatments were destroying our marriage, our bank account, our emotional well-being. We were done. "It wouldn't change anything between you two," Jessica continued. "It would just be a donation. Clinical. I'd go to a fertility clinic. They'd handle everything. He'd just be the donor on paper. The baby would be completely mine." "Jess, that's insane." "Is it though?" She leaned forward. "Think about it. You know his medical history. You know he's healthy, that he's smart, that he comes from good genetic stock. And he'd be around as the baby grew up. The kid would know their father, would have that connection, but without the complications of us being together. It's perfect." I told her I'd think about it. I told her I'd talk to Michael. I don't know why I didn't shut it down immediately. Maybe because some sick part of me liked the idea of Michael's genes continuing on even if I couldn't be the one to carry them. Maybe because I was so desperate to fix something, anything, that I grabbed onto this completely insane idea. I brought it up to Michael the next night. I expected him to laugh it off, to tell me Jessica was crazy, to shut it down completely. He didn't. "That's interesting," he said. We were in bed. He put down his book. "She really asked you that?" "Yeah." I told her it was insane. "I mean, it's unconventional," he said slowly. "But is it really that insane? She's your best friend. You've known her forever, and she has a point about wanting to know the donor. Michael, she wants you to father her child. Biologically, yeah, but I wouldn't be the father. Not really. It would just be a donation." Something in his tone made me look at him closer. "You're actually considering this?" "I'm just saying it's not completely crazy." He ran his hand through his hair. "Look, you know I've been struggling with the idea of not having kids. And if there was a way for my genetics to continue without putting you through any more pain, I don't know, maybe it's worth considering." We talked about it for weeks. Long, complicated conversations that always seemed to circle back to the same points. Jessica would be a good mother. The baby would technically be half siblings with any children we might have in the future if we ever got lucky. It would be someone we knew and trusted. Michael would be involved in the kid's life, but wouldn't have any parental rights or responsibilities. The more we talked about it, the more it seemed to make sense in a twisted way. I convinced myself I was being progressive, open-minded, a good friend. I convinced myself this was a gift we were giving to someone we loved. Looking back now, I can see all the red flags I ignored. The way Jessica would text Michael directly instead of going through me. The way she'd laugh just a little too hard at his jokes. The way Michael started dressing better on days he knew we were meeting up with her, but I didn't see it then. Or maybe I did and I just didn't want to. We all went to the fertility clinic together. I sat there while they explained the process, while they had Michael sign paperwork, while they scheduled his donation appointment. Jessica held my hand the whole time like I was doing her this huge favor. And I wasn't I? That's what made it so perfect from their perspective. I was gift wrapping my husband and handing him over. The donation was supposed to happen at the clinic. That was the plan. Michael would go in, do his thing in a sterile room with magazines and a cup, and they'd handle the insemination. Clean, clinical, no contact between them. But Michael came home that day and said they'd had problems with the collection, that they needed to try again in a few days. And then a few days after that, there was another problem. And another. I started getting suspicious around the third failed collection. But Jessica was texting me constantly with updates about her cycle, about how stressed she was, about how this had to work because she was running out of time. She was 34. Her biological clock was ticking. She needed this. So I pushed my doubts aside. Then one night, about 4 months into this process, I came home early from work. I'd left my phone at home and a client had been trying to reach me, so I'd cut my meetings short. I walked into my house and heard sounds from upstairs. At first, I thought we were being robbed. Then I recognized Michael's voice. And then Jessica's. I stood at the bottom of the stairs for a long time. Long enough to understand exactly what was happening. Long enough to hear her say his name. Long enough to hear him say hers. I walked back out the front door. I got in my car. I drove to a Target parking lot and sat there for 3 hours. When I finally went back home, Jessica's car was gone. Michael was in the kitchen making dinner like nothing had happened. He smiled when he saw me. Hey babe, how was work? I couldn't speak. I just stared at him. What's wrong? He asked. I came home earlier, I said. Around 3. His face went white, then red, then white again. Rachel, how long? My voice didn't sound like mine. How long have you been sleeping with her? He sat down heavily at the kitchen table, put his head in his hands. I'm sorry. God, Rachel, I'm so sorry. How long? 2 months. Maybe 3. I don't know. I'm sorry. Did it start at the clinic? He looked up at me. No, that part was real. We really tried to do it the right way. But the collections kept failing and we were both there and we were talking and she said maybe we should just try naturally, just once, to see if it would work. I laughed. That horrible broken laugh again. Just once. It became more than once, he said quietly. I know there's no excuse. I know this is unforgivable. But Rachel, you have to understand, we never meant for this to happen. It just, you pushed us together. You wanted this. I wanted you to donate sperm. I was screaming now. I didn't want you to sleep with her. I didn't want you to have an affair. I know. But the lines got blurred and get out. My voice was ice cold now. Get out of my house right now. Rachel, please, get out. He left. He went to Jessica's place, I found out later. Of course he did. Where else would he go? I called my sister, Amber. She drove 2 hours to get to me and found me sitting on the kitchen floor drinking wine straight from the bottle. He's been sleeping with Jessica, I told her, the whole time. The whole thing was a lie. Amber had never liked Jessica. She'd always said there was something off about her, something fake. I'd defended Jessica for years. God, I'd been so stupid. We're getting you a lawyer, Amber said. First thing tomorrow morning. That's when I found out I was pregnant. The timing was almost funny if you could find humor in a tragedy. I'd been so focused on Michael and Jessica, so consumed by their betrayal, that I'd missed all the signs. The nausea I'd attributed to stress. The exhaustion I'd blamed on emotional trauma. The missed period I hadn't even noticed because my cycles had been irregular from all the fertility treatments. I was 8 weeks along. I took 5 tests. Then I went to a doctor. Then I sat in my car in the medical center parking lot and screamed until my throat was raw. Michael found out from Amber. I still don't know how she told him, but he showed up at the house that night crying, begging to come in. Rachel, this changes everything, he said through the door. We're having a baby. Our baby, please let me in. Please let me explain. I opened the door. Explain what exactly? Explain how you've been sleeping with my best friend for months? Explain how you used my kindness, my trust, my desperate need to help someone to justify an affair? It wasn't like that. Then what was it like, Michael? Tell me. I'd love to hear your version. He came inside. We sat in the living room, the same living room where I'd had that first conversation with Jessica about the sperm donation. The same living room where the 3 of us had celebrated when the clinic approved everything. Jessica and I connected, he said finally. I know how that sounds. I know you don't want to hear it, but it's true. When we started spending time together for the donation process, we just clicked in a way I didn't expect. You clicked with my best friend while your wife was at work. You were pulling away from me, he said. The fertility stuff, it was destroying us. You know, we hadn't had sex in months. You barely looked at me. And Jessica was there and she was warm and she listened and she wanted me. So this is my fault? I stood up. Because I was depressed about infertility, you decided to sleep with my best friend. That's not what I'm saying. Get out again. Get out and don't come back. Rachel, you're pregnant with my child. So is she, apparently. You're going to be a very busy father. That stopped him. What? Jessica's pregnant? Or did you forget that part? That was the whole point of this nightmare, wasn't it? You got her pregnant. Congratulations. You succeeded. His face went through a series of expressions I couldn't quite read. She's actually pregnant. She told me 3 days ago. Called me all excited. Can you believe that? She called me to share the good news that she's carrying your baby. Like I'd be happy for her. Michael left. I filed for divorce the next day. Jessica kept calling, kept texting. She wanted to explain. She wanted me to understand that she loved him, that they hadn't meant for it to happen this way, that they wanted me to be part of the baby's life because I was technically responsible for its existence. That last part made me want to throw my phone into the ocean. I blocked her number. Then she started showing up at my work. That's when I went to the police and started the process for the restraining order. My lawyer, a woman named Diana, who looked like she'd seen every variation of human messiness, didn't seem surprised by my story. The restraining order will go through, she said. You have documentation of harassment. And given the circumstances, the judge will be sympathetic. What about the baby? I asked. My baby, I mean. Can Michael claim rights? He can, yes. But given the infidelity and the circumstances of your pregnancy, you'll likely get primary custody. He'll have to pay child support. And if you want, we can ensure that his access is limited. I want him to have nothing, I said. I want him completely out of my life. Diana looked at me with something like pity. Unfortunately, that's not realistic if you're having his child, but we can minimize contact. I left her office feeling empty. The restraining order was in process. The divorce was in process. My entire life was in process of falling apart or coming together. I couldn't tell which. Then things got weird. Jessica started calling from different numbers. When I'd answer not knowing it was her, she'd immediately start talking before I could hang up. Rachel, please, you have to to listen to me, she said during one of these calls. It's not what you think. None of this is what you think. I think you slept with my husband, I said. I think that's pretty straightforward. There's more to it. Please, can we meet somewhere public? I need to tell you something. It's important. Tell me now, not over the phone. Please. One coffee. 30 minutes. I'll never contact you again after that. I promise. I should have said no. I should have hung up, but something in her voice made me pause. She sounded scared, desperate in a way that was different from her previous calls. Fine. Tomorrow. The Starbucks on Market Street. Noon. I brought Amber with me. She sat at a table nearby, watching, her phone ready to call the police if Jessica tried anything. Jessica looked terrible. She'd lost weight despite the pregnancy. Her hair was unwashed, pulled back in a messy ponytail, dark circles under her eyes. Thank you for coming, she said as I sat down across from her. You have 30 minutes. Talk. She took a deep breath. Michael and I aren't together anymore. I don't care. Rachel, please. Just listen. We broke up 2 weeks ago. Or rather, I broke up with him. Good for you. 29 minutes. He's not who you think he is. He's not who I thought he was either. That got my attention. What are you talking about? Jessica looked around nervously, then leaned in. I started finding things. On his computer. On his phone. He'd leave them lying around my apartment and I'd see notifications or open browsers and she stopped, her hands shaking. Rachel, he's been doing this before. This exact thing with other women. My blood went cold. What? I found messages going back years. Women he'd convinced to. She stopped, tears starting to fall. It's a pattern. He targets women struggling with infertility or wanting children. He offers to be a donor or to help somehow. And then he manipulates the situation into an affair. I felt like I was falling. That's insane. I have proof. She pulled out her phone. I took screenshots before he realized I knew. There are at least 4 other women I found messages with. One in Portland. One in Seattle. One in... She swiped through images. Rachel, I think he has other children out there. Children he doesn't acknowledge or support. She showed me the phone, message after message. Different names, different women, but the same pattern repeated over and over. Michael offering to help. Michael being understanding and kind. Michael drawing them in. And then the messages would turn romantic. Sexual. One message thread stopped abruptly with the woman saying she was pregnant. Michael's response, that's wonderful. I'm so happy for you. And then nothing. No more messages. He'd ghosted her. Oh my God, I whispered. There's more. Jessica swiped to a different folder. I found out he's done this at least twice before. With women in relationships, I mean, where he convinced both the woman and her partner that he was being altruistic. And then he'd sleep with the woman behind the partner's back. Why didn't you tell me this immediately? Because I'm an idiot. She was crying hard now. Because when I first confronted him about it 2 weeks ago, he convinced me you'd planted the evidence, that you'd hacked into his accounts to make me turn against him, that you were mentally unstable from the infertility stuff and were trying to destroy us. And you believed him? For about 3 days, yes. But then I looked closer at the messages, the timestamps, the details. There was no way you could have faked all of that. And I started seeing things about him that I'd missed before. The way he'd manipulate conversations, the way he'd play victim, the way he'd... She wiped her eyes. Rachel, I'm so sorry. I'm so incredibly sorry. I let him use me to hurt you, and I didn't even realize it was happening. I stood up. My chair scraped loudly against the floor. Everyone in the Starbucks turned to look. You need to go to the police, I said. I already did. Last week. They said they'd investigate, but that most of what he did isn't technically illegal. The affairs were consensual. The ghosting isn't a crime. Unless one of these women wants to press charges for something specific, there's not much they can do. What about child support? If he has other kids out there, I gave them all the information I had. They said they'd look into it. I grabbed my purse. Started to walk away. Rachel, wait. Jessica stood too. I know you probably hate me. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but you need to be careful. When I broke up with him and told him I knew everything, he got scary. Not physically violent, but cold, empty, like he'd been wearing a mask the whole time and suddenly dropped it. He said if I told anyone, he'd make sure I lost everything. That he'd tell everyone I was an unstable homewrecker who'd seduced him. That he'd fight me for custody and win. Let him try, I said. I have a very good lawyer. I walked out. Amber followed me to the car. What the hell was that about? She asked. I told her everything Jessica had said. Showed her some of the screenshots Jessica had sent to my phone before I left. Amber went pale. Rachel, Michael is a sociopath. I married a sociopath. You need to tell your lawyer everything. Right now, today. We called Diana from the car. She told us to come to her office immediately. Diana looked through the screenshots with a carefully neutral expression. This is significant, she said finally. This could change the custody situation considerably. How? If we can prove he's done this repeatedly, if we can find these other women and children, we can establish a pattern of predatory behavior and fraud. It won't make him a criminal necessarily, but it will make him look very bad to a family court judge. So what do? We hire a private investigator. We find these other women. We document everything. Diana made notes on her legal pad. In the meantime, I want you to have zero contact with Michael. Zero. If he tries to reach out, you document it, but don't respond. And we need to address the restraining order against Jessica. What about it? If what she's told you is true, she may actually be an ally now, a hostile witness against Michael. You might want to consider dropping it. I thought about this. Not yet. I need time to process all of this. Diana nodded. Understandable, but think about it. Having her testimony could be valuable. Over the next month, the private investigator Diana hired found 3 of the women from Michael's messages. 3 women in 3 different cities who all had similar stories. Michael had come into their lives during vulnerable moments. He'd offered help or companionship. He'd started affairs, and then he'd vanished when they got pregnant or when the situation got too complicated. 2 of the women had children. Boys, both of them. One was 4 years old. One was 2. Michael had never paid a cent of child support. Had never even acknowledged their existence after the initial breakup. The investigator compiled everything into a comprehensive report. Diana used it to file an emergency custody motion, arguing that Michael posed a risk of fraud and abandonment to our unborn child. The hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later. In the meantime, I was getting bigger. My pregnancy was progressing normally, thank God. I was 19 weeks. Far enough along that I'd had an ultrasound. Far enough along that I knew I was having a girl. A little girl who would grow up knowing her father was a manipulative con artist who preyed on vulnerable women. Michael finally reached out directly, ignoring his lawyer's advice. He sent me an email. Rachel, I know what you're doing. I know about the investigation. You need to stop this now. Those women are lying. They're trying to trap me. You know me. You know I'm not the monster they're making me out to be. Please, think about our daughter. Think about what you're doing to our family. We can fix this. We can go to counseling. I made mistakes, but I love you. you. I've always loved you. Please don't do this. I forwarded the email to Diana without responding. She called me 5 minutes later. This is perfect. He's admitting there are multiple women. He's trying to manipulate you again. Save everything. The custody hearing was a disaster for Michael. His lawyer tried to argue that the other women were irrelevant, that past relationships didn't determine his fitness as a father. But Diana systematically destroyed that argument. She brought in one of the other women, Melissa from Portland. Melissa testified about how Michael had promised to co-parent with her, how he'd been excited about the pregnancy, how he'd been there for every ultrasound, and then how he'd disappeared completely at 7 months when she'd asked him to sign a formal co-parenting agreement. He told me I was trying to trap him, Melissa said, crying on the stand. He said I'd gotten pregnant on purpose to lock him down, even though he was the one who'd suggested we try for a baby naturally instead of through the clinic, even though he was the one who'd convinced me it was romantic. The judge looked at Michael with barely concealed disgust. Michael's lawyer tried to cross-examine Melissa, tried to suggest she was bitter and vindictive, but Melissa had receipts, text messages, emails, photos of Michael at her ultrasound appointments, everything. Then Diana dropped the biggest bomb. She'd found a fifth woman, a woman Michael had never mentioned in any of the messages Jessica had found, a woman from 6 years ago, before he'd even married me. Her name was Brittany, and she had a 6-year-old son named Tyler. Brittany testified via video call because she lived in Boston now. She told the court how she'd met Michael at a grief support group after her fiancé had died, how Michael had been so understanding, so kind, so supportive, how he'd helped her through the darkest time of her life, how they'd ended up in a relationship, how she'd gotten pregnant, how excited Michael had been, and how he'd vanished completely when she'd told him she'd received a large inheritance from her dead fiancé's estate. He tried to get me to sign a document giving him access to the inheritance, Brittany said, her voice shaking. He said it was to set up a trust for the baby, but when I showed it to a lawyer, they told me it was actually a document that would have given him control of the entire amount. When I confronted him about it, he disappeared, changed his number, moved. I never saw him again. The courtroom was silent except for Brittany's voice coming through the speakers. I tried to find him for years, she continued, for child support, for Tyler to know his father. I hired investigators. I searched social media, but it was like he'd ceased to exist. And then a few weeks ago, this investigator contacted me and I realized he'd just moved on to a new identity, a new life. Like Tyler and I had never existed. The judge looked at Michael. Mr. Harrison, do you have anything to say? Michael's lawyer whispered urgently to him, but Michael stood up. Your Honor, these women are— Sit down, the judge said coldly. I didn't ask you to address the court. I asked if you had anything to say through your attorney. Michael's lawyer looked defeated. No, Your Honor. We have no statement at this time. The judge granted me full custody with supervised visitation only. Michael would have to pay child support, and the amount would be determined by a separate hearing that would take into account all of his children, not just mine. Michael's face as the judge read the ruling was something I'll never forget. Not angry, not sad, just empty, like Jessica had described. Like the mask had dropped and there was nothing underneath. I walked out of that courthouse feeling something I hadn't felt in months. Not quite happiness, not quite satisfaction, but something close to peace. Amber hugged me in the parking lot. It's over, she said. You won, but it wasn't quite over. 2 weeks later, I got a call from Jessica. I still hadn't dropped the restraining order, but she'd been leaving messages with Amber, asking Amber to pass along information. She says she needs to talk to you, Amber said. She says it's important. About Michael. What now? What else could there possibly be? She wouldn't tell me. She said it has to be you. I called Jessica from a blocked number. Rachel, thank you for calling, she said immediately. I know you don't want to hear from me, but what is it, Jess? What's so important? Michael contacted me 2 days ago. He showed up at my apartment. My blood ran cold. Did he hurt you? No, nothing like that. He was calm, eerily calm. He said he wanted to talk about the baby. What about the baby? He said he doesn't think it's his. I almost laughed. Of course it's his. You've been sleeping with him for months. That's what I said. But Rachel, he said something weird. He said he'd been tracking my cycles, that the timing didn't match up, that if I was 8 weeks pregnant when I told you, the conception date would have been during a week when we weren't together. My heart started pounding. What are you talking about? When weren't you together? There was a week in early March where he said he needed space, said he needed to think about our relationship, about what he wanted. I thought he was pulling away, maybe having regrets. But now, she paused. Rachel, what if he was with someone else that week? What if there's another woman we don't know about? Why would he tell you this? Because he's trying to get out of child support. If he can prove the baby isn't his, he doesn't have to pay. And with all the other cases piling up from the other women, he's looking at a huge financial burden. Jess, are you sure you didn't sleep with anyone else? I'm sure. But Rachel, that's not the weird part. The weird part is that he suggested I get a paternity test. And he said if the baby isn't his, he knows who the father is. What? He said there's someone who's been watching us. Someone who's been following his pattern. Someone who's been— She stopped. He said Marcus, my ex-husband. I felt like the ground had dropped out from under me. Marcus? But I know. He's remarried. He's in California. But Michael said Marcus had hired a private investigator to follow me. And that the investigator had— She was crying now. Rachel, I don't know what's real anymore. I don't know if Michael is lying or if there's something I'm missing or if I'm losing my mind. You need to get that paternity test, I said. Right now, today. I'm scared. I know, but you need to know the truth. Jessica got the paternity test. It took 2 agonizing weeks for the results to come back. The baby wasn't Michael's. She called me, hysterical. I don't understand. I don't understand how this is possible. I didn't sleep with anyone else. I didn't. Rachel, you have to believe me. But even as she said it, I could hear the doubt in her voice. The confusion. Did you ever black out? I asked. Were there any nights you can't remember? There was one night, at a bar. I was meeting Michael, but he was late and I was drinking and— She stopped. Oh my God. Rachel, I think someone drugged me. Call the police. Now. She did. They investigated. They pulled security footage from the bar. And there, clear as day, was a man approaching Jessica while she sat alone at the bar. A man who bought her a drink. A man who waited until she was stumbling, barely conscious, and then helped her to his car. The man was Marcus, her ex-husband. He'd flown in from California specifically for this. He'd planned it meticulously, and when the police searched his hotel room, they found Michael's business card and a series of email exchanges between the two men. Michael had told Marcus about the affair, had told him Jessica was vulnerable, had essentially set her up for Marcus to assault her while she was incapacitated. Why? Because Michael needed a way out. If the baby wasn't his, he could walk away clean. No child child support. No custody battle. And he'd still have the satisfaction of having destroyed Jessica the way she'd destroyed his marriage by exposing his pattern of behavior. It was calculated, premeditated, evil. Marcus was arrested. Michael was arrested as an accomplice. The charges were serious. Conspiracy to commit sexual assault, drugging someone with intent to commit assault, possibly more as the investigation continued. Jessica terminated the pregnancy. She couldn't bear to carry Marcus's child after what he'd done. And me? I sat in my lawyer's office, 7 months pregnant with my daughter, trying to process the fact that my husband was not just a serial cheater and manipulator, but an actual criminal who'd orchestrated the assault of my best friend. The custody order will be modified, Diana said. Given the criminal charges, Michael will likely have zero access to your daughter, supervised or otherwise. Good, I said. My hand rested on my belly. My daughter kicked, strong and insistent. That's good. But there was one more twist. A week after Marcus and Michael were arrested, I got a call from Melissa, the woman from Portland who testified at the custody hearing. Rachel, I need to tell you something, she said. Something I didn't mention in court because I wasn't sure it mattered. What is it? Michael's real name isn't Michael Harrison. It's David Chen. He changed it legally about 7 years ago. And before he changed it, he was married to someone else. In Texas. My blood went cold. What? I found out by accident. I was trying to track down his social security number for the child support case and found the name change documents. And when I searched David Chen, I found a marriage certificate from 12 years ago. Is he still married? I don't know. The woman's name is Katie Chen. Or was Katie Chen. I tried to find her but couldn't. But Rachel, if he's still legally married to her, then your marriage to him isn't valid. I finished. Oh my God. I hung up and immediately called Diana. She made some calls. By the end of the day, we had confirmation. Michael David was still legally married to Katie Chen. He'd never divorced her, which meant my marriage to him was null and void, which meant I wasn't actually married, which meant I had no legal ties to him whatsoever. This is actually good news for you, Diana said. It simplifies things significantly. You were never legally married, so there's no divorce to process. And while he's still technically the father of your child, the custody order stands. He has no rights. What about Katie? I asked. Does she know? I'm trying to locate her now. It took another week, but Diana found Katie Chen. She was living in Austin, Texas, working as a nurse. She had no idea Michael had moved to Seattle, changed his name, remarried, illegally, and had multiple children with multiple women. Katie flew out to meet me. She was small, quiet, with kind eyes that looked tired. I thought he was dead, she said. We were sitting in a coffee shop, the same coffee shop where I'd met with Jessica. Life had a cruel sense of symmetry. He left 12 years ago to go on a business trip and never came back. Never called, never wrote. I filed a missing persons report. The police investigated but never found anything. After 7 years, I had him declared legally dead so I could move on with my life. But he wasn't dead. Obviously not. She laughed bitterly. He was here, building a whole new life, a whole new identity. And I spent a decade thinking he'd been murdered or had amnesia or had... She stopped, tears streaming down her face. I mourned him. I grieved for him. And he was fine the whole time. He just didn't want to be married to me anymore. I'm so sorry, I said. Do you know why he left? Katie asked. Did he ever tell you? No, he never mentioned you at all. We just found out I couldn't have children. Genetic condition, my eggs weren't viable. We'd been trying for 2 years. She wiped her eyes. 3 days after we got the diagnosis, he went on that business trip and never came back. It all clicked into place. Michael's, David's obsession with having biological children. His pattern of targeting women desperate for motherhood or struggling with fertility. His need to spread his genetics as widely as possible. To have multiple children with multiple women. Like he was trying to prove something. He'd left Katie because she couldn't give him children. And then he'd spent the next 12 years manipulating women who were desperate to have them. He's a monster, Katie said quietly. I loved him so much. I would have done anything for him. But because my body couldn't do the one thing he wanted, I wasn't worth staying for. We sat in silence for a while. 2 women who'd loved the same man, or thought we'd loved him. It was hard to know if the person we'd loved had ever really existed. Katie stayed in Seattle for the trial. Both trials, actually. The bigamy charges were filed first. Then the conspiracy and assault charges. The prosecutors combined them into one case because they painted a picture of sustained, calculated abuse spanning more than a decade. Michael, David, whatever his name was, pled not guilty. His lawyer tried to argue that he'd suffered from a mental break after leaving Katie, that he hadn't been in his right mind when he'd changed his identity and remarried, that he'd been suffering from an undiagnosed personality disorder. The jury didn't buy it. The evidence was too extensive, too deliberate, too calculated. He was convicted on all counts. The judge sentenced him to 15 years in prison. 15 years. I gave birth to my daughter, Emma, 3 weeks after the sentencing. Katie was there. So was Amber. So was Jessica. Yes, Jessica. We'd been rebuilding our friendship slowly. Very slowly. She was in therapy. I was in therapy. We both had a lot to work through. But we were trying. Because at the end of the day, we'd both been victims of the same man. We'd both been manipulated and used. And while Jessica had made terrible choices, I was starting to understand that she'd been operating under the same false assumptions I had. She'd thought Michael was a good man helping his wife's best friend have a baby. She hadn't realized she was being groomed until it was too late. Trust was still broken. But we were picking up the pieces. Emma was perfect. 7 pounds 4 ounces. Dark hair like Michael, but my eyes, my nose. She looked at me with such clarity, and I felt my heart crack open in a way I didn't know was possible. She's beautiful, Katie said, looking down at Emma in my arms. Thank you for being here, I said. Where else would I be? She smiled sadly. We're sisters in a way. Sisters in surviving the same nightmare. The other women came to visit over the next few weeks. Melissa brought her son to meet Emma. Brittany sent a gift basket from Boston. We formed a strange support group, connected by our shared history with a man who'd tried to destroy all of us. Michael's lawyer filed an appeal. It was denied. Marcus's trial was separate and happened 6 months later. He was convicted of sexual assault and sentenced to 20 years. Jessica testified. It was brutal, but she was strong. Stronger than I'd ever seen her. I'm not defined by what was done to me, she told me after the verdict. I'm defined by how I survive it. Now it's been 2 years. Emma is walking, talking, turning into a full person with opinions and preferences and the loudest laugh I've ever heard. She has no idea who her father is. Maybe someday I'll tell her. Maybe I won't. That's a decision for future Rachel to make. Katie moved to Seattle. She's Emma's godmother. She and I have coffee every Tuesday morning. We talk about everything except Michael. He's taken up enough of our lives. lives. Jessica is dating someone new. A woman, actually. They met at therapy. They're taking things slow. Jessica says she's never been happier. Amber just had her second kid. Emma adores her cousins. Melissa sends Christmas cards. So does Brittany. We have a group chat where we share parenting tips and vent about life. The restraining order against Jessica was dropped a year ago. We're not best friends anymore. We'll never be what we were. But we're something. Something new. Something forged in fire and trauma and the slow, painful work of forgiveness. I still think about that conversation in my living room sometimes. The one where Jessica first suggested Michael be her sperm donor. The casual way we discussed it over wine, like it was a simple favor between friends. If I could go back, would I shut it down immediately? Would I never have let them meet without me present? Maybe. Probably. But then I think about Emma. About how she exists because of this twisted, horrible series of events. And I don't know how to reconcile that. How do you regret the path that led to the best thing that ever happened to you? My therapist says that's okay. That both things can be true. That I can hate what happened while loving what came from it. I'm still working on believing her. Last month I got a letter from Michael. Or David. I still can't decide what to call him. It was forwarded through the prison system. My lawyer looked at it first to make sure it wasn't threatening. It was 3 pages long, handwritten. It started with, "I know you'll never forgive me," and went on to detail every justification, every excuse, every but you have to understand that I'd heard 1,000 times before in 1,000 different ways. I read the first page. Then I stopped. I didn't need to read the rest. I knew how it ended, with him painting himself as the real victim, with him explaining how everyone else had forced his hand, with him asking for understanding he'd never given to anyone else. I tore up the letter, threw it away, and I didn't think about it again until now, sitting here writing this all out. People ask me sometimes if I'm angry, if I hate him. The truth is messier than that. Some days I'm furious. Some days I'm numb. Some days I look at Emma and feel such overwhelming love that there's no room for anything else. But mostly I feel free. Free from a man who saw me as a means to an end. Free from a marriage that was built on lies. Free from the version of myself who was so desperate to fix everything that I couldn't see I was being broken in the process. The restraining order that started this story is gone now. Jessica can come near me. She does sometimes. We get lunch, we talk. We're not what we were, but we're something. And Emma will grow up knowing she's loved. She'll grow up knowing she came from pain but isn't defined by it. She'll grow up knowing that sometimes the people who are supposed to protect you fail, but that doesn't mean you stop trusting everyone. She'll grow up knowing her mother fought like hell to give her a better story than the one she was born into. That's enough for me.